My husband gave me an ultimatum. Quit your job and move in with my mother, or I'll divorce you. The shattered calm. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the glowing screen of her phone. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, traced the lines of the text message that had just shattered her world. Mark, her husband of 6 years, had sent her an ultimatum. Quit your job and move in with my mother, or I will file for divorce. The words cut through the air like a knife, their coldness resonating in the silence of the house. The room, bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun, felt suddenly foreign, as if it belonged to another world, one where her life hadn't just been upended by a single text. For a moment, Sarah felt as though she couldn't breathe. The life she had built with Mark, the love they had shared, was unraveling before her eyes, and she had no idea how to stop it. The clatter of a pot in the kitchen jolted Sarah from her thoughts. She turned her gaze towards the source of the noise, only to find the kitchen empty. It was just her, alone with the weight of Mark's words pressing down on her. Chapter 2. The Long Night. That night, sleep was elusive. Sarah lay in bed, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear, anger, and disbelief. The rhythmic ticking of the clock on the bedside table only served to heighten her anxiety, each second marking the passage of time that she felt slipping away from her. Mark had always been close to his mother, but his insistence that they move in with her had come out of nowhere. In the past few months, he had grown increasingly distant, his once warm and affectionate demeanor replaced by a coldness that Sarah didn't recognize. They had argued about it repeatedly, with Mark accusing Sarah of not caring about family, and Sarah accusing Mark of trying to control her. But this ultimatum was different. It wasn't just about moving in with his mother. It was about the life Sarah had built for herself, the career she had worked so hard to achieve. She had risen through the ranks at her marketing firm, earning the respect of her colleagues and the satisfaction of knowing she was making a difference. The thought of giving it all up, of becoming dependent on Mark and living under the same roof as his overbearing mother, was suffocating. She rolled over in bed, glancing at the empty space beside her. Mark had chosen to sleep in the guest room after their latest argument, and the emptiness beside her felt like a premonition of the future that awaited them if they couldn't find a way to bridge the growing chasm between them. Chapter 3. The Mother-in-Law. The next morning, Sarah found herself at her desk at work, trying to focus on the tasks in front of her, but her mind kept drifting back to Mark's ultimatum and the figure at the center of it. Her mother-in-law, Evelyn. Evelyn had never been an easy woman to deal with. She was strong-willed, opinionated, and had a way of making Sarah feel small, no matter what she did. From the beginning, Evelyn had made it clear that she didn't think Sarah was good enough for her son. There were always little comments, thinly veiled criticisms about Sarah's career, her housekeeping skills, even her cooking. Evelyn had been widowed for nearly a decade, and she had leaned heavily on Mark for support, expecting him to fill the void left by his father. Mark, for his part, had always tried to keep the peace between Sarah and his mother. But as Evelyn's health had begun to decline, her demands had increased. She wanted Mark to move back in with her, to take care of her, and she didn't see why Sarah couldn't give up her career to support her husband in this. Sarah had tried to be understanding. She knew that family was important to Mark, and she had tried to be there for Evelyn, visiting her often and helping out where she could. But the idea of moving in with her, of sacrificing her independence and her career, was too much. And now Mark was demanding it, as if it were a foregone conclusion, as if her life didn't matter. Chapter 4. The Pressure Builds. The tension at home only grew in the days that followed. Mark became increasingly distant, spending more time at his mother's house and less time talking to Sarah. When he was home, their conversations were stilted, filled with the unspoken weight of the ultimatum hanging between them. Sarah found herself walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing and spark another argument. She threw herself into her work, finding solace in the familiarity of her routines. But even there, she couldn't escape the cloud of dread that followed her. Her colleagues noticed her distraction, but she deflected their questions, unwilling to share the details of her crumbling marriage. One evening, after another tense dinner, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind her, and sank down onto the cold tile floor. The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable, as the reality of her situation crashed down on her. How had it come to this? How had the man she loved become someone who could demand such a sacrifice from her? Her thoughts spiraled as she sat there, her sobs echoing off the walls. She knew she had to make a decision, but the choices before her felt impossible. If she gave in to Mark's demands, she would lose herself, her career, her independence, everything that made her who she was. But if she refused, she would lose her marriage, the life they had built together, and the man she had once thought was her soulmate. Chapter 5. Seeking Advice. The next day, Sarah decided she needed to talk to someone. She couldn't keep this all bottled up inside, not when it was tearing her apart. She called her best friend Emily and asked if they could meet for lunch. Emily had been Sarah's confidante for years, and she had always been there for her through thick and thin. When they met at a small cafe downtown, Sarah felt a rush of relief at the sight of her friend's familiar face. After ordering their food, Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of where to begin. But the concern in Emily's eyes was all the encouragement she needed. She poured out the whole story, from Mark's growing demands to the ultimatum he had given her. Emily listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each word. When Sarah finished, she looked at Emily, hoping for some kind of reassurance, some validation that she wasn't being unreasonable. But Emily's expression was conflicted, her brow furrowed in thought. "Sarah," Emily began cautiously, "this is a tough situation. I get that Mark wants to be there for his mom, but asking you to give up your job and move in with her, that's a huge sacrifice. It's not something you should be pressured into." "But what if I'm being selfish?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "What if I'm just putting my career above my marriage, above family?" Emily reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "You're not being selfish, Sarah. You've worked hard for your career, and you have every right to want to keep it. But this isn't just about the job. It's about respect, about feeling like an equal partner in your marriage. Mark can't just make demands like this without considering how it affects you." Sarah nodded, feeling a glimmer of validation in Emily's words. But the fear and uncertainty still gnawed at her. "I don't want to lose him, Emily, but I don't know how to fix this." "Maybe it's time for a serious conversation," Emily suggested gently. "One where you both lay everything on the table. If you can't find a way to compromise, then maybe you need to think about what's really best for you." The thought of confronting Mark filled Sarah with dread, but she knew Emily was right. She couldn't keep avoiding the issue, hoping it would go away. She had to face it head on, no matter how terrifying the prospect was. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. That evening, Sarah found herself pacing the living room, waiting for Mark to come home. She had rehearsed what she was going to say over and over in her mind, but now that the moment was approaching, she felt her resolve wavering. When Mark finally walked through the door, the tension in the air was palpable. He set his keys down on the table and looked at Sarah, his expression guarded. "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Mark nodded and took a seat on the couch, motioning for her to join him. Sarah sat down, taking a deep breath before she began. "Mark, I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, keeping her tone as calm as possible. "I understand that your mother needs help, and I want to support you in that. But I can't give up my job and move in with her. It's too much. I've worked too hard for my career, and I need my independence. I can't just throw that away." Mark's expression darkened. "So you're choosing your job over our marriage?" "No, I'm not," Sarah replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm choosing to stay true to myself. I want us to work this out, but I need to feel like an equal partner in this marriage. I can't just give up everything for you." Mark shook his head, his jaw clenched. "You're being unreasonable, Sarah. My mother needs us. This isn't just about you. And it's not just about you either." Sarah shot back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "We're supposed to be in this together, but you're acting like I don't have a say in any of this. You're making demands without even considering how I feel." Mark's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "Maybe you're the one who doesn't care about this marriage then. If you can't make this sacrifice for the sake of our family, maybe we shouldn't be together." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, and she felt her heart shatter. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had to stay strong, even if it felt like her world was collapsing around her. "If that's how you feel," Sarah said quietly, "then maybe we do need to take a step back." Mark's silence was deafening, and Sarah knew deep down that they had reached the point of no return. Chapter 7. The End of a Chapter. The days that followed were a blur of pain and heartache. Mark moved out, staying with his mother while they sorted out the details of their separation. Sarah was left to navigate the wreckage of her marriage alone, trying to make sense of how everything had fallen apart so quickly. She threw herself into her work, finding solace in the one thing she could still control. But even that felt hollow now, the satisfaction of her career overshadowed by the loss of the life she had once envisioned for herself. The divorce process was painful and drawn out, each meeting with lawyers a reminder of the love that had been lost. But through it all, Sarah found a strength she didn't know she had. She leaned on her friends, rediscovered old hobbies, and began to rebuild her life, piece by piece. Chapter 8. Finding Peace. Months passed, and slowly the wounds began to heal. Sarah found a new sense of purpose in her work, taking on new challenges and responsibilities that reignited her passion. She reconnected with friends she had lost touch with during her marriage, finding comfort in their support and understanding. One evening, Sarah found herself back at the cafe where she had first confided in Emily. The air was crisp, the scent of autumn leaves mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. As she sat by the window, watching the world go by, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She had survived the worst of it, and she was still standing. She had learned that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the greatest growth. She had lost a marriage, but she had found herself in the process. As she left the cafe, Sarah took a deep breath, savoring the cool air and the feeling of freedom that came with it. She knew that her journey wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next. She had found her strength, her voice, and a new beginning that was all her own. This story, titled The Crossroads, follows Sarah, a strong-willed woman whose marriage is tested when her husband, Mark, gives her an ultimatum: quit her job and move in with his overbearing mother, or face divorce. Sarah is forced to confront her values, independence, and the love she once thought unbreakable. The narrative delves deep into the emotional turmoil of making difficult choices, balancing personal and familial responsibilities, and ultimately finding strength in the face of adversity. As Sarah navigates the pressures of her marriage, her career, and her own identity, she learns that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to personal growth and newfound freedom. The story is rich with character development, exploring the dynamics between Sarah, Mark, and his mother Evelyn. It portrays the complexities of relationships, the importance of self-respect, and the resilience required to rebuild one's life after a profound loss. Through Sarah's journey, the story emphasizes the power of self-discovery and the courage it takes to stand up for what truly matters.